Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Chris with SBC, and I was just thinking to myself, it's been a long time since I got a chance to make a video for you guys. I've just been really busy transferring from this place and relocating to another place that I can specifically build a room for my animals. If you guys want, I will document that process for you guys. Today's video topic has been sparked by a lot of questions that I still continue to see asked online. I know that we get a lot of newer keepers into the hobby all the time, and they're looking for sources for information. So today's topic is going to be, should we be feeding inside of our enclosures or a separate feeding bin? And how long should we wait after feeding to be able to handle our boa constrictors? So let's go ahead and get into this. Just before we do, I'm going to take a chance to show off this boy right here. This is Rio. Come on, show your face, Rio. Show your face, Rio. He is my blood arabesque boa, and he is a sweetheart. He's beautiful. On this camera, it's never going to pick up the red that he is. He really is a Mars red in person. Maybe he has oranged out just a little bit since I first got him, but he really is. He's just saturated. He's got a lot of pinks on his belly. But he's an awesome looking snake. He's going to be an awesome looking snake whenever he gets older as well. He's got a perfectly connected pattern on him. Let's go ahead and get into this video. Look at this guy. This guy is just absolutely at peace right now. He is just chilling, hanging out. That's awesome. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is how long should you wait to handle your boa constrictor after feeding them? And this is going to kind of tie one into another. If you feed your boa constrictor is going to need to take that time to digest. Now their belly is full. Again, if you want to see feeding guides or anything like that, you can go ahead and ask questions. Just to touch on it simply, you probably shouldn't feed your boa constrictor anything bigger than the width of its body, the thickest part of its body. So you just fed that snake and it's got a big old bump in it, or at least a medium-sized lump inside of its belly. The animal is going to need to be able to sit on heat and take the time to digest. If you are immediately handling that snake, then there's a possibility that you can get them to regurgitate, and it is not fun dealing with a regurgitation event. You gotta really backtrack, and I can cover that in a second video. You gotta really backtrack to get them back on feeding again, safely. So I always say that if you fed your boa constrictor, you should probably wait about 3 days. They're going to spend probably 3 days sitting on their heat to be able to digest that meal. For the majority of the time, you'll see your boa constrictors going back and forth between that cold side and their hot side. And they'll hang out on that, they'll thermoregulate back and forth quite often, especially if you walk in there at nighttime and you see them, they'll be going back and forth all the time, just exploring their enclosures. But after they've been fed, they don't usually move. My animals don't usually move off that hot spot. They're just on that heat digesting. So to avoid any extra stress, I always say that it is best to just let them do their thing, sit on that heat, let them digest for 3 days. That's usually about the time that you'll see them pass. And passes and poop. After 3 days, you're usually in the clear. You can usually pull them out. As long as your heat and everything is right, they should have been able to digest by that time. Then you can safely pull them out and handle them. Any sooner than that, it does actually put quite a bit of stress on their body. And so like I said, this kind of ties us into our next topic here. Should we be feeding animals inside of their enclosure, or should we be removing them and putting them in a separate feeding bin? I see it a lot more in the ball python community than I do in the boa community. And mainly it's because ball pythons are a lot of people's first pets, and they haven't really been told anything about tap training, and they really don't want to deal with the defensive animal whenever they're reaching in their enclosure to pull them out. But the thing is we gotta do what's best for the animal. Removing animals from their enclosure to a separate feeding bin is kind of outdated information. We just talked about how handling a snake within that 3-day time period can cause some extra stress on the animal. Now, having an adult snake eat in a separate enclosure and then you move it into its regular enclosure is probably not going to do much harm to it. But when you're talking about a baby that's just had a good lump-sized meal in it, no, the snake has not eaten recently, but that's where you see the difference. You could get a regurgitation event. It could put some stress on the snake's body. So the best way to avoid that is by not having to move it back and forth. Another reason why I think that it isn't necessarily a good idea to move your snakes to feed them is when that snake comes out. Well, first off, these animals are repetitive learners, and you can form a habit with these guys without even really meaning to, and they do it naturally. If I always take this animal out of the enclosure to feed it, when it comes out of the enclosure, it's thinking it's time to eat. It's thinking I might get a meal today. I might get a meal. I let my wife handle these snakes. I let my kid handle these snakes. I let my kids' friends handle these snakes. I don't want them to ever be in a situation where they get bit by the animal because the animal was thinking it might be time to feed. Another thing is, what if you have to put it into a bin to transfer it to the vet? Take it to the vet, and then it's already thinking that it might get a meal and it ends up super defensive while it's at the vet's office. So these are things to think about whenever, you're weighing your pros and cons, if it's worth feeding inside of a separate bin or feeding in the enclosure. Now, I understand where a lot of people are coming from when they're saying, okay, I don't want a defensive snake whenever I'm reaching inside of the enclosure. They're told that it's better to have a snake that is calmer whenever you're trying to pull it from the enclosure. I get that. But these are not ball pythons. These are boa constrictors, and they get anywhere between 6 to 8 feet. Sometimes, really it's locality dependent. There are a lot of boa constrictors that are smaller than that, but that's a pretty big snake. That's a big difference from a ball python. And if somebody gets bit by a 6 or 7 foot snake, it's not going to be a pleasant experience for them. I want everybody who handles my animals to have a pleasant experience. So when I take these animals out of their enclosures, I don't want them thinking about food at all. So that's my idea on, I don't think that you should be feeding in a separate feeding bin. If you have some extra pros to add to that list, aside to my cons, then, go ahead and post it in the comments. Now, I do personally feed all of my animals inside of their enclosures. So I will be the first one to tell you that if I'm opening up the enclosure and it has been 5-7 days, especially because boa constrictors can be garbage disposals, they're looking up for food. They're thinking, hey, this might be time to eat. This is where tap training comes in. You can tap train your animals, and I'll give you an example of that in this video on what tap training does and how to do it. If you are going inside of the enclosure and you tap them on the nose and you remove the animal, now when the animal is out of the enclosure, it knows that there's no food coming. This animal here, this beautiful Rio, knows that there's no food coming. I can put my hand right in front of his face. I'm not going to get bit. I mean, I'm not going to say that's for every snake, but he knows there's no food coming. He's not giving that food response. He's not giving that drive. He's not following me as like I'm prey. So that's where I think there's more safety involved for not just me when I have the animal outside of the enclosure, but for other people that I let handle the animal. Another pro for feeding your animal inside of the enclosure is that, one, you're not stressing them out by taking them out of the enclosure and putting them into a separate feeding bin. Sometimes you get a lot of picky eaters, and when you get those picky eaters, when you move them into that feeding bin, they might just refuse for you. They might not take the meal. They've already been overstimulated. They don't want to know. They feel too out of place. They feel vulnerable in just a little feeding bin. So, in order to avoid that, just feed them inside of the enclosure. And then as well, you don't have to stress them by moving them back and forth with a full belly. They can immediately, after eating, go and sit on that hot spot and start that digestion process. So just kind of recapping, whenever you've fed your animal, it is best to wait 3 days before doing any kind of heavy handling to give them that time to be able to digest. I also think that it is better to feed them inside of their enclosure because me personally, I would prefer dealing with an animal that thinks there's food coming when I'm going into the cage and knows there's no food coming when they're out of the cage than vice versa, thinking there might be food when they come out of the cage when other people might be handling them. So give me a second. I'm going to put this guy back here and then I'm going to show you what I mean by tap training, how that looks, how it works, and how to implement it. Alright, so this animal down here has not been pulled out at all. I'm going to go into the cage. I'm going to show you exactly what tap training is and how you implement this. So that way you can calm down a snake that might be thinking that it's time to feed. So Mahogany down here has not been pulled out. I haven't touched her cage at all today. I'm just going to go ahead and slide her out. And she is sometimes one of my more feistier boas. You see how her head's up already? She's kind of looking like there might be food coming. She doesn't know yet. And that's okay. So where tap training comes in is you can use something like a hook. You can use a roll of paper towels, something that's softer, especially if you have a much more defensive boa and you know it's going to bite something. I just simply put that little tap on their nose, and now she's in thinking mode. After you do that, let's go ahead and reach down and pick them up behind the business end. Now she's out of her enclosure, she knows that there's no food coming. And that's what I want, because if my kids handle these snakes, if my wife handles these snakes, if my kids' friends handle these snakes, I do not want them handling a snake that might think there's gonna be food coming. Here's this girl, she's on my top shelf. If I reach in here and whatnot, she's immediately gonna be following my hand. She's definitely one of them. You just give her the little tap on the nose. And that puts her in that thinking mode. Alright guys, I appreciate you making it to the end of this video. If you got anything good out of this video, if it helped you in any kind of way, take the time to like, follow, share, subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. If there's anything that you want me to go over, put it in the comments. I can make future videos over it. I pulled out one more snake for you guys. This is Helios. He is my cow Sunglow Motley, and he was a potential breeder for this year, and we are going to see if anything comes out of that litter. But he has a bunch of pinks that run all the way up his side here. Again, it's pretty hard to see on this camera. But until next time, happy keeping.